Dr. Martin Luther King's last book was entitled Where Do We Go From Here? Chaos or Community? He published that book in 1967, the year before he was assassinated. The question posed by the title was as important today as it was back then. These are interesting times. Yesterday was Juneteenth, and many major corporations and even some states are acknowledging its historical significance and even making it a paid holiday. And Bunker Boy not only changed the title of the date of his rally, but even mentioned the consideration of Juneteenth becoming a national holiday. Maybe we will finally have an answer to Frederick Douglass' question after all. What is your 4th of July to a slave? Juneteenth. The death of George Floyd has seemingly become a watershed moment in history. Millions of people worldwide have taken to the streets to protest against police abuse everywhere. Since May 25th, people have been in the streets chanting Black Lives Matter. They're demanding that law enforcement officers be held accountable for acts of violence against Black citizens. And it's not just Black folks in the street. It seems like there might be an equal number of white folks. In addition to police accountability, they're all demanding systemic racism be addressed. And it's not just folks in the street, but in political offices, corporate boardrooms, sports franchises, and entertainment. Congress is even working on legislation to address the issue. An unprecedented number of police officers are now facing murder charges. Police chiefs either have had to step down or are under fire. And some states are responding to the call to defund the police. Even Malcolm X's plan of taking the civil rights abuses of the U.S. to the world stage and the UN is taking shape. But where do we go from here? Let's posit that for a moment. What if all the challenges around police brutality and accountability are met? Qualified immunity is revoked. All police are required to not only wear body cameras, but to keep them on under the penalty of potential criminal charges and loss of job. Chokeholds and other restraints above the shoulders are banned. All police misconduct reports are put in a national database. Police departments are demilitarized and defunded. Those resources being shifted to service professionals trained to respond to non-police related situations. Unjustified shootings and killing of citizens leads to firing and prosecution of police. Black people are not being stopped by the police in excess of the percentage of our representation in the population. Incarceration of Black people in nonviolent drug-related charges of possession is stopped. Lynching becomes a federal hate crime. White supremacist hate groups like the KKK are declared national terrorist groups by the federal government. No-knock warrants are banned. Then what? How will the overall condition of Black people be affected? Sure, we will feel freer to jog, drive, walk, picnic, birdwatch, and sleep in our own beds in our own homes without the fear of possible life-threatening interaction with the police. And don't get me wrong, in terms of our mental, physical health, that would be a huge benefit. But how will those things address and eliminate the adverse effects of systemic racism? Truth be told, racism was founded on the economic imposition of enslavement on the African. The idea of white supremacy was created to justify that enslavement. The African had to be seen and believed to be less than human and therefore inferior to whites. So how did we get to the real root of the problem? How do we change the bottom line as it pertains to systemic racism? We cannot boycott our way to economic empowerment. To have lasting effect, a boycott must be coupled with an economic injection to be truly effective. Not doing something may be effective in drawing attention to an issue. However, when the not doing ends, the condition still remains. Not doing has to be coupled with doing. We need another chant. How about that hook from the song Ain't Nothing Going On But the Rent? And I think it goes, no protest without investment. History shows that the reason why the median wealth of white households is 10 times greater than that of blacks, actually up from 8.3% in 1983, is directly related to whites being empowered through home ownership and blacks being denied the same opportunity. That denial is directly related to systemic racist policies of the US government set up to discriminate against blacks owning homes. The government not only refused to federally back loans to black people through HUD and GI bills in our own neighborhoods, but also refused to allow blacks to move into other neighborhoods. The black-white discrepancy in median household wealth is not the result of a lack of education. African Americans today are better educated than we were in 1968. More than 90% of younger African Americans ages 25 to 29 have graduated from high school, compared with just over 50% in 1968, which means that we're closing the gap in terms of high school education rates with white folks. Today, blacks are also more than twice as likely to have a college degree as we were in 1968, even though we still lag behind that of white folks with college degrees. The economic gap can also not be related to political power. In 1965, there were only 6 members of the combined Congress, says 535 members that were African Americans, compared to nearly 10 times that as many today, as we have 55 members. The only metric where black folks have not closed the gap with whites is in home ownership. The gap has actually increased over the past 50 years. In 1968, 41.1% of black families owned homes, compared to 66% of whites, a difference of 25%. By 2018, however, the gap had widened to 30%, where 41.1% of blacks own homes, compared with 71.1% of whites. There's a video going around on Facebook and WhatsApp where the sister talks about what's going on in Minneapolis relative to the riots and protests and looting. I know most of you have probably seen that, so I won't go through that. But she highlights a couple major important points as it relates to what happens in terms of ownership and what we need to do to turn things around. She emphasizes that the importance of ownership and draws the analogy to the game of Monopoly. She says, imagine playing a game where you had to go around the board 400 times before you could own anything, which is about analogous to the 400 years of blacks not being access to ownership in this country. How would you fare? She concludes with the same conclusion of Malcolm X, in that blacks are burning down our own neighborhoods because we do not own anything in our neighborhoods. Her analogy of Monopoly started me to thinking. To draw home the point, we decided to put her premise to test. As Monopoly has 8 pieces, one piece represents 12% of the total number of people playing the game, which is closely analogous to the percentage of black folks in the US. So we modify the rules as follows. One person would be the black person and not allowed to own anything until their 400th pass. Everyone rolls the dice. The highest roll is the black person, and that person rolls first. As they cannot buy anything anywhere, everywhere they land, if unowned, is auctioned to the other players. If the black person lands on a property which is owned, they must pay the owner twice the rent that the property is asked for until there are no houses, as long as there are no houses and hotels. Once there are houses and hotels, the black person pays the regular amount required. The game is over when the black person is bankrupt. The challenge is to see how long the black person can survive. The longest so far is a black person was the third person to be bankrupt. If we truly address these foundational problems of systemic racism, we have to create pathways to community ownership and empowering black businesses. To do that, that's why I support the third premise of the How We Fight plank, which calls for eating only at black-owned eateries. As it relates to ownership, those with means and true commitment to turn the page perhaps could do the following. What if those who have the means would provide financing to black home ownership? Financing mortgages is a win-win proposition. The investor nearly triples their investment over the life of the loan, and the borrower benefits from developing an asset with potential for generating generational wealth transfer. What if professional sports teams or players were to provide the financing for black folks to own their homes? That could truly be transformational in their respective cities and demonstrate a real commitment to change. Those same entities and others with the means could do the same thing with regards to black businesses. What if they were to purchase one or more franchises and form a joint venture with community members, offering members a share in ownership? I bet anything, those businesses would not worry about civil unrest and being burnt down. Finally, tomorrow, Sunday, is the beginning of the summer solstice, June the 21st to the 24th. Our ancient ancestors in Kemet identified the summer solstice and the winter solstice as the two most important holy day periods of the year. The solstices are the times of the year when the functional part of our being, the spirit, is most receptive to suggestion from the conscious part of our being, the self. This is the essence of what our ancestors meant when they etched in stone the epitaph, "Know thyself." Therefore, we have an optimal opportunity before us to take what we imagine, what we want our lives individually, and what we want our collective lives to be in the coming year, and take those images into tomorrow and to the next 4 days of the summer solstice. And if we focus on these images for these 4 days, meditating as much as possible, and holding those images in our minds, we can truly transform a world. Hetep, have a wonderful 4 days sleep, visualizing the new world, and remember, no protest without investment.